So the evolution of AGI is it's actually going to be able to excuse me, and actually be able to have embedded cognitive capabilities. So the things that sets us apart right now won't set us apart by 2029.
We're speaking to our next guest, Rashidi. She served in IBM as part of the team that launched Watson, and she's currently the author of an upcoming book called Your AI Survival Guide: Scraped Knees, Bruised Elbows, and Lessons Learned from Real-World AI Development. And we'll be talking about some of the themes of this book as well. Welcome to the show, Sol. It's good to have you.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Well, let's talk about the development of AI itself. I know that's a very broad topic. So I'll just start with reading a tweet from Elon Musk. So Elon was responding to Elon was
Wow,
responding.
you're going there, David. All right.
I think I know you know where I'm going already. Ray Kurzweil was on Joe Rogan's show not too long ago, and he said that AI will likely achieve human-level intelligence by 2029. I want to just get your take on what this actually means for the layman. Elon responded in a tweet saying, AI will probably be smarter than any single human next year. By 2029, AI is probably smarter than all humans combined. First of all, what do they mean by smarter?
So there's generational evolution of AI capabilities, right? So the first generation was really around robotics, teaching the machine to do things that we code, teach, and they're performing repetitive tasks. Then we went into traditional AI or applied AI, which is really around automation or augmentation. Now we're into generative AI, which is really around creating content based on historical content. So similar to how artists and actors get inspiration from prior works of art, you can view generative AI as that. It's how do you build new based on the past? Then there's two other evolutions that have been tagged post us, AGI and ASI. Artificial. So AGI is what everyone's talking about. ASI, right? Artificial super intelligence is all the horror movies that we see, the Transformers, the Cons, all those, movies that we've seen that we've loved, and we're like, oh boy. So the evolution between generative AI and ASI is AGI. And the intention is right now, the artificial intelligence capabilities that are in the marketplace are very good at repetition, automation, and generation. But there's a theory that it lacks cognitive abilities, the ability to sense emotion, the ability to have intuition, the ability to process and aggregate information and come up with a new point of view. Things that we humans are wonderful at doing, which is right now, even if you're using ChatGPT at home or with your kids, you may read what it says, but you're always going to edit it to a certain degree based on your style, your voice. So the evolution of AGI is it's actually going to be able to excuse me, and actually be able to have embedded cognitive capabilities. So the things that sets us apart right now won't set us apart by 2029. Now, here's what's interesting. There have been so many projections. In the 60s and 70s and 80s, AGI was anticipated to take shape and form around 2040, 2050. But because of Moore's law, right, the exponential ability of growth with chips, compute, workloads, models, etc., that 2040 estimated timeline is now assumed to be 2029, which is right around the corner, right? In all honesty. And I think at the pace at which we're going, I would not be shocked if we hit AGI by then. But for our sake, I do hope that globally we slow down and be a little bit more deliberate and thoughtful about that. So I think that's realistic based on Moore's law, our exponential growth of change and pace and evolution. And we've just got some really brilliant individuals. But going back to Elon's thing, when Watson went live in 2011 with its AI capabilities, it was very, very much focused on the B2B market. Only enterprises had access to this. They had the funding, they had the resources, they had the energy. And so it was B2B centric. What set OpenAI and ChatGPT apart in November 2022 is that they made those capabilities available to the average consumer like you and I. So the capabilities have existed, but the accessibility, the channel strategy is fundamentally new. So when Elon says that next year we're going to have AGI, this is a personal point of view. You guys take it with a grain of salt. I think there are going to be glimpses of that capability that will exist. I don't think it'll be available for commercial use by any means, but we will see pockets of it potentially in defense, potentially in the variety of companies that Elon manages and some of the other companies because it's already heavily in research. But what actually can be converted into a commercial application is to be determined.
Wait a minute, sorry, did you say defense? I think there's been several movies made about why this is a bad idea.
I did say defense, yes. So even though we don't talk about it, AI in defense has been around a very long time. Um, but it's similar to the Cold War. It's don't touch it, don't talk about it, nothing will agitate it. But if you take a look at the global economy, the US is out in the market talking about all of our AI capabilities. Um, Russia, China, many of the other countries that have a different agenda. It's not that they're not doing it, they're just not talking about it the way we do. So the question is will all of it converge to something? So yes, AI has been in defense for a very, very long time. It's just not something publicly discussed because we're
But
trying to
this is
keep
a
it.
different level of AI. We're talking about AGI in which the system could theoretically teach itself how to operate, right? Wouldn't
Yes,
that be potentially very dangerous if operated or integrated into machines and weapons?
very much so.
This is a reply by Jan LeCun, who is the chief AI scientist currently at Meta, in response to Elon's tweet. He disagrees with Elon. I want to get your take on where you stand on this debate. He says no. If it were the case, we would have AI systems that could teach themselves to drive a car in 20 hours of practice like any 17-year-old. But we still don't have fully autonomous, reliable self-driving, even though you have millions of hours of labeled training data. So what needs to happen before we pass this hurdle, before a computer can start teaching itself how to drive, using an example?
If the pace of change is already an amplification effect of tenfold each day, we've got 365 days for the year to turn. That is a lot of time for development and evolution. So he's right. It doesn't exist today. I totally agree with that. But if you take the brain power of the Elons of the world, the Sam Altmans of the world, and many others who are playing this field, do we really think in 365 days at the rate of a tenfold amplification effect, we wouldn't get to some level of generating that capability? It may not be democratized. Remember, there's a difference between creating the capability, creating a product from the capability, and then putting it in hands of the user so that it can be leveraged. I'm talking about the very first node, which is creating the capability. That's 1,000% possible, in my opinion, based on what we've even seen in the last year and a half. But whether it's commercialized and turned into a product for public use, that I don't think so.
Okay, tell us about your work at IBM Watson, and then we can talk about some of your work now. I'm curious as to how much the work done on Watson has spilled over to current large language models that we see in applications like ChatGPT today.
You know, it's so funny. I don't think IBM gets the credit it deserves for being first to market, first to entry, and creating commercial capabilities around artificial intelligence. When Ken Jennings beat, or when Jeopardy beat, sorry, when Watson beat Ken Jennings in Jeopardy in 2011, and IBM made the decision of, okay, we're taking Watson to market. Let's do this. That was a monumental like moment. And going to market and being first to market is not easy. But IBM was positioned because if you think about the amount of compute, storage, and workload capacity that it just requires to process these models, IBM was the only one that was really primed. I mean, you could throw in a few like Intel and others, but the storage, the compute, like the processing, IBM was primed to be able to house and store all of that. And if you saw old images of what generated and powered Watson, it was rows and rows and floors of servers. But they had the money, they had the capability, they had the patents and the inventions to be able to do so. So 2011, Watson gets launched, and 2014 is where the public started having some mixed reviews on whether or not it was effective. The thing that no one really assesses is Watson first went to market with financial services and healthcare. The two verticals and sectors that are the most regulated have the most amount of data, but the data in it of itself is extremely massive and fragmented. So I would say the volume, the variety, and the velocity of information generated, there was just a little bit of a misalignment. But there were many places where Watson did excel. But my job was go to market. It was to meet with our early innovative companies, discuss the art of the possible, build a strategy, establish use cases, and then go back and work with the engineers and the product developers and saying, okay, here's the use case. Here's what we forward sold, here's what we need to build, and this is the proof of concept that they're willing to sign on board. Don't get mad at me, but we're doing that right now with all the management consulting firms. We're partnering with these companies who want to do AI, helping them establish a strategy, identifying use cases, and then finding tech partners that can actually help us deploy something in POC. Not much has changed from that perspective. We're still doing it, but our optionality has increased because it's no longer you have to use Watson. Now there's 3 different dozen, foundational models that we can pick and choose and leverage from closed source to open source. We've got thousands of off-the-shelf AI solutions that you can plug and play with some training and human involvement. Um, so it's evolved, but the channel strategy is predominantly what's different. The accessibility is what's predominantly different. And things that were classically reserved for enterprises like compute and processing and energy and storage, now they're just commodity-based services. So we can scale it at what we want right now.
How can, so did you said it was used primarily, or initially for financial services and healthcare. Can you just narrow down on some of the applications for financial services in particular?
I mean, 2 applications that I worked on for commercial banking and wealth management. Wealth management was powering the financial advisors with information. Financial institutions have thousands of offerings and services, and it is nearly impossible to know the offerings and services. And so the intention was is how do we arm the financial advisors with information so they knew the latest and greatest in their performances. So when they met a prospective client, they could do one of 2 things. Enter basic information around age range, income to debt ratio, risk tolerance, and we would create some boundaries around the type of investments they should make, and then align that with the product portfolio of the bank that was, or the wealth management division that was servicing the client. That use case is still the number one use case today within wealth management or within commercial banking. It can take up to 9 months to train a customer service rep to be able to vet in and take in all the 1-800 calls. And why 9 months? Well, one is you've got PDF files after PDF files of here are products and here are warranties and here are service level agreements and here are percentage cash back and et cetera, et cetera. It is nearly impossible to memorize all that. So the first 3 to 4 months was just pure product training. Then it was a couple months of shadowing to make sure that they could handle any type of client calls. And then they would go into production. Well, we were building these massive knowledge stores of all this information so that if a customer service rep didn't have an answer, we didn't have to wait 8 months before they went into production. They could type in question, hey, what's the cash back on this particular credit card for this particular household? And it would tell them. So you shrank the 9 month to, on average, we discovered about 3.5, 4 months. Those use cases are still the predominant ones, or credit cards and anomaly detection. Amex has killed it. That's not new technology. That's been around for a decade and a half, if not 2.
So from what I understand, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the computer was taking rules made by people and using the data provided to the computer to output a series of recommendations or dialogues, if you will. But can the computer teach itself to make what we consider human decisions, like how to trade, when to place a trade, which stocks to buy or sell and when, and ultimately make its own trading and investment rules, not just like, okay, if a stock fell below, 40 PE, buy. It's not so robotic, but something more, a little more fluid. Can the computer do that?
Yes, that's what machine learning is. So if you take a look at the different sort of sects of advanced analytics and artificial intelligence, right? You've got your basic descriptive analytics, which is I have this data, it's telling me this. Nothing new, nothing glamorous. It's here's how your current picture looks based on the historical pictures. Then you've got what we get into predictive analytics. Based on the past, here's where we predict the future. It may or may not be accurate, but it's different than forecasting because forecasting, it's a statistical method that still takes historical data with a bunch of other pieces of data and comes up with a forecast of where it goes, but it's still reliant on your data. Whereas predictive modeling takes not only your data, but a variety of other sources that have nothing to do with your data that you think there's connection or interoperability. And it will predict based on those variables like ticket prices for flights and weather patterns, right? What should the ticket prices be? Or ticket prices for flights, weather patterns, and whether or not that city has a major conference going on. Can we drive the prices up? But the weather's going to be bad, so there's going to be a lot of cancellations. So here's a predictive model of what your price optimization is going to be. Then beyond predictive analytics, you've got machine learning. Machine learning is fundamentally taking in and gobbling a bunch of information, bunch of information, and it's learning off the information that you're feeding it. So my favorite is right now, there is a great image of, you guys can Google it, Chihuahua and blueberry muffins, where it's a grid of different images between the face of a Chihuahua and blueberry muffins. The machine can't tell the difference yet. And it's really, really hard to tell the difference.
Oh, I see it.
Right? Do you see it? It's like, it's perfect. But the machine, fundamentally, for other images, can tell the difference between an adult cat and a kitten, or a giraffe and an elephant, because it has taught itself through all these images and pixelations of what is and what's not, because you've tagged the data and it now knows right from wrong, left from right, or this image from this image. But where the nuances are kicking in and why we haven't hit AGI yet is it can't tell the difference between a Chihuahua's face and a blueberry muffin. Or one of my favorites was I had entered in salmon in water. Well, we know it's the fish in water. It gave me salmon fillets in water that were swimming. Didn't totally quite get it. And then my third is there was a dog taking a nap behind a gated fence. We know that's a dog taking a nap, but the machine had tagged it as a tiger because where the sun had set, it started casting shadows and lines on the dog's belly because it was sleeping behind a gate. So it can tell the difference between images, but the nuances and the context are where it's tripping up. So that's why there's differing thoughts. Can we get to AGI next year or not? But the sophistication of these things is jumping leaps and bounds on a daily basis. So I think
Basically, if I want to bypass security camera to have facial recognition, just dress up as a blueberry. Got it. Wear some sort of mask that looks like food, because clearly computers can't tell between food, difference between food and faces. I think investors watching this program right now would like to know your opinion on the sectors or the types of companies employing AI that can see the most growth. Is it companies involved in the retail space, companies like that use a computer like IBM Watson that can answer questions with a computer without using humans for customer service? Is it healthcare? Is it financial services? Is it aerospace? Do you see basically a sector or an industry that would see the most explosive growth using AI going forward in the next 5 years, let's say?
Yeah, I'm a little bit biased. And even in the book, right, I have 10 different industries. In 10 different functions, right? Industries being healthcare, education, manufacturing, et cetera, and functions being procurement, HR, legal. And I've highlighted 3 use cases that are in production for each. So it's a total of like 10 industries, 10 functions, 3 use cases in each. So I've got, 60 use cases I've outlined, and I've seen some wonderful things happen. I'm biased because I think every vertical and every industry and every function should fundamentally think about leveraging it for the greater good in one capacity or another. And it's possible, and there's a ton of opportunity. So I don't want to single out any particular one. What I can say is if you have apprehension or there's an element of fear, or you're just not sure because there's just so much crap out there, pardon my French, you're doing yourself a disservice because I think there will be a divide between those that leverage it deliberately and thoughtfully, and they may be slow and methodical, and that's okay. There will be a competitive advantage versus those that sort of say it doesn't align with our strategic initiatives, and we don't have the time, the capacity, the focus, the funding, et cetera. I think there is going to be a divide for those that leverage it and those that don't. But in my humble opinion, there's room everywhere. I just say be thoughtful about it, be deliberate about it. Don't let FOMO get the best of you. Right now, you need a human in the loop. You need your workforce to fundamentally be able to think through and deploy where the opportunities are. We'll see it a lot more.
Let's explore this question in a different way. So a while ago, Goldman Sachs put out a report, and I'll just quote their paragraph exactly because I think it's been misquoted a lot in media. They said that over the next few years, we can expect a 7% or almost $7 trillion increase in global GDP as a result of generative AI. And despite the significant uncertainty around the potential for generative AI, its ability to generate content that is indistinguishable from human created output and to break down communication barriers between human and machines reflect a major advancement with potentially large macroeconomic effects. We kind of touched on this earlier. It also said that 300 million people could be exposed to jobs lost to automation. They didn't say exactly that 300 million jobs would be lost, more so that just 300 million people, more full-time jobs, will be exposed to automation. And so if we were to explore this further, which types of jobs would be most likely lost as a result of automation and AGI?
Is that McKinsey came up with a similar study a few years ago, just based on machine learning and applied AI. And it had mentioned, I think its estimates were 10 to 12 trillion, and it was a few trillion off, all said and done. It's really hard to gauge these things. It's really hard to estimate these things. There are new numbers from all sorts of sources, right? The McKinseys, the Bain, the BCGs, you name the source. We all know it's 10 trillion and above. And the range is quite depending on the source. Where we land, that's just hard to tell. But for investors, for parents, for knowledge workers, for those that work in enterprise, and for everyone in between. There
I
is
mean,
an evolution.
when you think about it, if we lay off people but still have the same amount of output, by definition, that's a productivity increase, right? So I'm just wondering what will happen to those workers once they're laid off. Where do they go?
About it right now, we have enterprises. We have Fortune 10s, we have Fortune 50s, we have Fortune 100s, where you have employees who've been there 20 plus years. And they house so much information. It's what we call institutional knowledge because it's not documented. And they are well preserved, and there's longevity within those enterprises because one, they've been there a really long time. Two, they're the only ones who know how to do that specific job and function. And three, nothing's documented. So there is a divide. It's not like everyone's going to go away because we're able to repeat their tasks. Like I've tried automating the tasks that those institutional workers were performing. And it was nearly impossible because one, they weren't willing to share the information, and two, there was no documentation. So I knew what to automate. So there will be a percentage layer that will be protected for the meantime. There's no doubt about it. However, for everyone else that has not been with a company for 20 plus years and is near retirement, there is an upskilling that needs to occur so that you don't become irrelevant. But that's not due to AI. Whether you look at the Industrial Revolution and when we had, power plants and car factories and, to where we are now, every 5 to 8 years, fundamentally, there's been a shift in the workforce and that upskilling that needs to occur and being able to stay relevant. Just a classic example, a graphic designer in the 1960s is not a graphic designer right now. And we thought that, oh, with the advent of Adobe, those jobs are going to go away. No, those are tools now that those individuals have adapted to using as their primary means of creating content and something creative. Everything evolves, but you've got to evolve your knowledge set, period, or you do become antiquated. When you become antiquated, you are no longer an economic product to your employee or an institution. And when you are no longer relevant, that's where replacement happens. With or without AI, that has been a trend year over year.
So here's my follow-up question. If we take into account that there's been a lot of jobs created just in the last 100 years that didn't exist 100 years ago, precisely because of technological innovation, let's extrapolate that going forward. Can you envision some new occupations that we currently don't have or don't have a need for yet that would come as a result of AI being more fully integrated into our professional and even personal lives?
This is a personal anecdote, definitely not a professional. But some friends we're geeking out of like what would be a really cool job in the future that we fundamentally need. We have we have enterprise architects, we have solution architects, right? They all kind of do a different thing. I think corporations, companies, entities, any institution of any type can fundamentally benefit from a tool architect in the sense that here's our primary core businesses and our operating model. And here's what we use on a day-to-day basis to be able to support it. Email, Excel, Adobe, this digital campaign, these A/B testing, predictive modeling, and what CRM, CDP, you name every acronym that's there. It is too much right now for folks to absorb because of the optionality. So it would have been great if we had, and it would be great if we could have the ability to take every tool, every capability that's out there and start creating bundles. It says if you are running a business X, here is the bundle Y. If you're running a business A, here is the bundle B, because it's too much for CEOs, CTOs, any CXO, to be honest with you, or any leader to go through the process of deciphering what is relevant for their business model and what gains are they going to get out of it. So if there's some way to architect bundles and very domain specific solutions and tools, so that if I'm in healthcare and I'm doing image diagnostics, I don't have to go and research the millions of options or vendors and partners that are selling a diagnostics solution. I know that these 93 are for me. Let me see what best suits my needs. So I would love to see more domain specific bundles and capability specific bundles for an industry and a function and a specific operating model, which we don't have because everyone's just selling everything and throwing everything at a wall and seeing what sticks.
What's harder to develop, the software component of AI or perhaps the hardware pairing? For example, if you wanted a humanoid robot to work at a restaurant, just throwing out a random example here, is that more difficult to develop than the machine learning aspect or the large language models aspect?
Actually, neither. I would actually say it's the organizational model and the adoption of both the software and the hardware within the frame. Let's just take that example that you just threw out there, the humanoid serving food at a restaurant. Writing the code and testing the code isn't difficult. And then getting the hardware to somehow support for humanoids within a restaurant isn't the issue. It's how is your wait staff going to work with that humanoid? What is that humanoid going to serve and what are they responsible for serving? Are they expected to know every single ingredient? Are they going to make recommendations or do they need to call to make a recommendation? Should they be asking if anyone's allergic to anything? When people come in through the restaurant and you've got the hostess who's about to seat you, are there certain questions that they should ask to see if you're allergic to or not allergic to having a humanoid and interactions with it? It's taking that nucleus of individuals that understand their roles and responsibilities. You've now added a humanoid in the mix. How do their roles and responsibilities shift? How do you train them to accommodate the new definitions? And then running through several scenarios over and over again, just as they have, to make sure that there's this seamless interoperability between their new now and the humanoid. To me, that's the hardest part in all of this.
The closest I've been to a fully automated restaurant, there was still a lot of human service, but I was sitting, and it's a Chinese hot pot restaurant. You sit there, you scan a QR code, you order online on your phone, there's no human interaction, and then this automated tray that is self-wheeling comes to you. It knows the exact location of your particular table, and then it just trolleys over the food that you order. You take it out, and it knows when the food's been dispensed, and then it goes away. It can't take your order, it can't talk to you, but that's the closest I've seen that's come to that particular example. But I want to talk about your book a little bit. So just a few themes from your book that we should be aware of. AI, your AI survival guide, scraped knees, bruised elbows, and lessons learned from real world AI deployment. Sounds like a compilation of a lot of interesting stories, just based on the title.
A lot of scraped knees, a lot of face plants, failures. I think there's a difference between talking about it versus doing it. I've been doing it for the past 14, 15 years. I've been doing the type things for 20 plus, but true AI deployments, yeah, for a while.
Tell us about some of the major themes of the book.
So one of them is how to actually select where you're going to start with AI. And by the way, total shameless plug, but we became a bestseller yesterday, and the book technically isn't sale yet. Kindle is, hard copy's not. But yeah, number two for artificial intelligence and number one for starting a business, oddly enough. I don't question Amazon's way of categorizing things, but so be it. But like one of the key chapters and one things that I'm seeing a lot of people trip up on is actually how to start, where to start. And there's a few things everyone talks about, pick use cases that generate business value. Well, with all due respect, if there's a business problem to be solved for, they all have business value. So how do you break the tie between a use case in manufacturing versus a use case in the legal department versus a use case with marketing versus like you can't. There's that. The second part is if you choose use cases based on business value, you may get stuck in what I call perpetual POC purgatory, which is let's do a POC. Let's just test it and try it. But when you guys say, okay, there's value, now let's convert it over into a full production grade AI application, there's challenges because people forget to look about the realities of if you choose really on business value, but not your ability to deploy, which has elements of infrastructure, data accessibility, forget data cleanliness, let's just say data accessibility, the right talent, um, and your internal maturity. You may know DevOps. Do you know ML ops? Right? How do you put an ML model or an AI model in production? A lot of companies haven't exercised that muscle. So why pick a use case that requires you to overreach beyond your current capacity? So like I always say, bend it, but don't break it. And if you pick a use case that's fundamentally stretching your organization into things it's never done before, that thing is never going to see the daylight because it's going to take you a year just to put the foundational elements in place. So I always say don't pick a use case based on business value. Pick it based on complexity and criticality. And then there's a framework for that. What are the questions to ask? How do you rate it? And based on that conclusion, here are the 5 types of AI strategies, right? There's efficiency, there's productivity, there's effectiveness, there's growth. And each of those has nuances. So know what to chase based on your existing maturity and how to start.
Can you give us an example or a few examples where we've talked about some applications that worked, at least from your experience, but tell us about some applications that you've seen businesses employ that just either A, didn't work, or B, weren't effective, or C, just completely was not necessary in the first place?
There was a moonshot project that I was doing with a few individuals, nothing to do with any of the enterprises I served, and I thought it was a great idea. Fundamentally, we had hit a point where we saw some bridges collapsing, buildings collapsing, and it was taking lives. And so I thought, let's put our knowledge to good use. So me and a few individuals came together and we said, we're going to build something for the construction tech industry, for developers. Pieces of these technologies exist, but how we put it together and what we do with it is where the novelty kicked in. And the idea is that, well, you can put sensors on buildings right now to measure tilt, to measure corrosion, and you can, right now, engineers go out, they hold their devices, they pull in the information, then they go away. 2 months later, they're going to give you an engineering report. This is the case for skyscrapers. This is the case for apartment buildings and condos and parking lots and shopping malls, stadiums. This is how it's done. But it's very manual in nature, and you're depending on that engineering report to give you insights on the health of a structure. But all of that could be automated. And so we could put sensors on a building that already exist, automate the data feeds, aggregate the data, and fundamentally create an analytical model that shows you, on average, a 1 millimeter tilt is normal year after year. Or if you're by the ocean, your coefficient level or your rebar corrosion level of 2% is normal. But it can tell you when you've exceeded the normal guardrails. And the intent was to tell you where in your structure you have deficiencies, and then to go another step and give you a recommendations engine of what you need to fix based on structural damage or deficiencies that we're seeing in the model. Not rocket science to build. And we thought we could save lives and do good. We failed. Can you take a guess why?
Um, I'm not an engineer. You know what? I'm not going to make a fool of myself. I'll let you answer that.
Here's a guess. It had nothing to do with the technology. It had to do with
People didn't integrate well with the technology. I'm guessing that.
they didn't want the technology because if they knew of the fixes and they didn't do anything about it, they were held liable. And it then became a financial risk.
I do hate it when the lawyers get in the way of technological progression, but yes.
Well, I mean, that's where it would end, but these were property managers. These were like, I know about it. I have to do something with it, and I don't have the funding and I don't have the support. I don't want to know. It's too much information. And we are held liable if, God forbid, we didn't fix something that we were told to fix based on the data. Not a technology issue, a human issue. And I was so excited about this. It was predictive modeling, machine learning. It was a beautiful heat map of where the structural integrity issues were. And we were nerding out on this thing. And what killed it, dead in the tracks, was liability. Because the more you know, the more you're held liable for it. So just examples of like something very doable, software and hardware, but the acceptance, the interoperability, we couldn't get anywhere with it.
Perfect. Where can we learn more about you and your work?
Okay, this sounds really horrible, but if you were to just Google Sol Rashidi, there's tons of podcasts, there's tons of keynotes and stuff. I'm very active on LinkedIn, but definitely not on Instagram. That's just, I think I'm too old for that stuff. The book is out on Amazon right now. It is a bestseller. I'd love any support, but that's on the side point. I'm just here honestly to to explain things in a more of a layman's term. There's a lot of excitement around this space, but there's also a lot of hype. And I just like breaking it down to something very practical and realistic. And if I can be of service to anyone, I would be.
Okay, so we'll put some of your social media links down in the description below, so make sure to follow Sol. Before we close off, just so the people know that this is a real conversation and you're not an AI deep fake, tell us a fun fact about yourself that a computer would not know.
I played professional rugby, and I thought that I would play professional rugby for my entire life. And the way I got into data and AI was, you know how it gets when you get older, you don't recover nearly as quickly. So instead, I had to be a professional, and I took the one job no one wanted, and that was to be a data engineer.
Okay, not a lot of rugby players turned data engineers. So that's definitely unique. Okay, well, now that we verified this real conversation, thank you. We'll have you back on again to talk about more AI news. This is a very comprehensive overview of the industry. Thank you.
Hey, David, I appreciate it.
And thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.